I've been doing some thinking lately as I continue to get comments on my Smashing Pumpkins reviews I did on their last 3-part disappointment, ATUM. The 3-album concept idea known as ATUM were Smashing Pumpkins albums in name only. And the fact that Billy Corgan had the gall to compare these songs to the classic Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness masterpiece was purely a marketing gimmick. ATUM can't even stand in the same room as Melancholy. Now, most people agree that these albums were more Billy Corgan solo albums than they were a proper Smashing Pumpkins record. So, okay, if that's the game he's playing now, I thought to myself, well, why don't I go back and listen to all that side stuff he did that wasn't the Smashing Pumpkins? Maybe there's some real hidden gems in there. So that's what I did. Oh boy, was it fun. Stick around as I review all of Billy Corgan's other music. This is Dancing with Ghosts. For this video, we're going back through my mind as a young music fan because like a lot of this stuff dropped when I was in school still, and just my mindset at the time is totally different than it is now. And, you know, hindsight being 2020, yeah, my opinions changed a lot. So let's start with Zwan, the super group that started 3 years after the Pumpkins broke up, and their first and only album, Mary, Star of the Sea. When I found out about Zwan, this was shortly after the Pumpkins officially broke up in 2000. At this point in my fandom, I didn't care for Machina or Adore. I know, what a dick. In my mind, I was a hardcore fan, but only of their finest work. I've since changed my mind completely, and I view Adore as one of the Pumpkins' finest albums. And I really like Machina too, but at that point, I felt like it sounded too pop compared to their earlier stuff, so I figured Zwan was going to be the same thing. Plus, they had some little teaser of one of their new songs called Settle Down, in which Billy Corgan sings, "Whatever I can do, I will, 'cause I'm good like that." Which sounded to me like a line some boyfriend would say to his girlfriend in a cheesy 90s rom-com, like, "Hey, babe, whatever I can do, I will, because I'm good like that." You know, so that was a turnoff. It's like the Pumpkins would have never, a lyric like that would have never existed in a Smashing Pumpkins song. But on top of that, the music was markedly less heavy than anything they'd done previously, so I wasn't exactly jazzed about this album. And then I heard the single Honestly, and I was completely turned off. No thanks, this clearly isn't the Smashing Pumpkins. I'm out. The single sucked, so I can only imagine how boring the other songs would be, and I was right. This was Billy's attempt to write a feel-good pop rock album, and it is such a boring listen that after a while, it just became background noise, and I stopped paying attention that I was even listening to the album. But while recording this album, Billy made a few breakthroughs in the studio that he would carry on to other albums, much to our chagrin as Pumpkins fans. I will point out some of the things that I noticed on this Zwan album that you never really heard before in the Smashing Pumpkins catalog. This is the first time we really hear Billy's voice like high and loud in the mix. Before he never in all of the Pumpkins records, his voice was either equal with the music, or it was like just slightly above it, or sometimes it was even below the music. And that's where his vocal timbre sits the best, in my opinion. This Zwan album was the first time we really heard Billy's voice sitting like high atop kind of everything else, and it was the beginning of the end from there, because he really got a liken to that model of having my voice on top, because I have such a big ego that I must be the first thing or the main thing that is heard. The second thing that I noticed off this record was female backup vocalists. That was interesting. We never had backup vocalists on any of the Pumpkins records of any kind, male or female. Billy would sometimes harmonize with himself, but for the most part, backup vocals, like especially female backup vocals, you just never really heard it. So that's something that he would go on to utilize a lot on Sear, a future Pumpkins album that I did not think too highly of, that I did a review of if you want to check that out. But yeah, he used female harmonies a lot on that album. It almost like carried the album. And then finally, from this Zwan record, what I noticed was just stacks and stacks of background harmonies, which was, again, something that the Pumpkins never did in their decade-long run from 90 to 2000. And that definitely carried over into Zeitgeist, specifically the song Bleeding the Orchid. But for whatever reason, on that album, it sounded good to me anyway. I thought it was cool. Oh, by the way, you have to notice Patron Saint Corgan here on this candle. I don't know if you ever noticed that little detail back here on my... it had to be up front for this. So yeah, those are some things that I definitely noticed from this Zwan album that did carry over into everything Billy Corgan would do after. Up next, we have The Future Embrace. Billy Corgan's first solo album came out in 2005. By the time this album came out, I had lost all faith that Billy Corgan had the juice left in him to squeeze out another good record. And upon listening to this, I was correct. I want to say the name of the album has got to be a play on words, because the thing that Billy is embracing here is electronic music, which is oftentimes seen as like futuristic, which I will admit, a lot of the music on this album is quite good. There's very interesting electronic instrumentation and sound manipulation for sure. But what turns this album into a slog are Billy's lackluster vocal melodies. Aside from the rare gem that is Zeitgeist, and fuck you if you don't agree with that, after the year 2000, it seemed to me like Billy Corgan just lost all ability to write a good melody. It's so weird. Take a melody like Stand Inside Your Love. It's fantastic. It's exciting. It almost doesn't need music behind it for it to just be good. But anything I've heard thus far has shown me the dude just doesn't want to put the time into making good melodies anymore. The music definitely does all the heavy lifting on this album. The only one breath of fresh air melody-wise is the song To Love Somebody, but that's because it's a cover of a Bee Gees song, so it's not even like Billy can take credit for that one. Bottom line, the music on this album is really good, but the vocals just bore the piss out of me. Up next, we have William Patrick Corgan, Ogilala. I hate you for making me say that word by naming your album that. Okay, first of all, why is he trying his hardest to come off as a pretentious douche the older he gets? William Patrick Corgan, what are you, fucking dean of admissions at Harvard all of a sudden? Also, remember when I was complaining about the ATUM albums and how this is what happens when Billy Corgan is left unchecked without a producer to wrangle him in? Yeah, you remember when that was my big reasoning as to why ATUM sucks so bad? Well, apparently I was wrong, and he can still suck with a producer, because the legendary Rick Rubin was recruited to produce this album in 2017. And let's talk about the album title. Ogilala, or however the fuck you're supposed to pronounce it. I can't figure out why, but for whatever reason, the older Billy gets, the more bizarre and arcane his lyrics become. Gone are the days where he would be more direct and write lyrics in normal English that people might be able to understand. No. He's out to prove how erudite and deep that little mind of his can go, with song titles such as The Half-Life of an Autodidact. We can infer that the Billy that we once knew from that title alone, has checked out and is never coming back. As far as the sound of this record, Rick Rubin basically came in and does what he always does to try and revive an artist's career. Strip it down and go back to the basics, man. But what we ended up getting was a very long hour of drumless, melodyless mundacity with a huge emphasis on piano and Billy's voice. Again, let me explain something to you about Billy Corgan's voice. It's like salt. In small amounts, it's fantastic, and it really flavors a dish and gives it more of a bite. But if you unscrew the top of the salt bottle and pour it onto your steak, that meal is inedible and you might die. That is the case here. Billy Corgan's voice should never be the main feature of any song, especially now that he's gotten older and his voice is even more shrill than it was when he was younger. This album is a slog to get through, and you can trust me when I say there are 0 hidden gems found here. William Patrick Corgan, Cotillions, 2019. I swear to God, these album titles. I don't remember seeing any kind of press or advertising for this album whatsoever. I remember Billy did some TV appearances for Ogilala at least, so I knew that album existed somewhere out in the world. But this Cotillions album flew right under my radar. So what were my first impressions when I listened to this like an hour ago? Holy shit, Billy Corgan made a country album. What the fuck? Well, no, not really. There are like 3 or 4 songs in this record that sound like that, and the rest is the boring piano stuff he did on Ogilala. I guess you could say this album is very rootsy, but again, Billy doesn't have the voice to pull off rootsy. He is a rock singer at best, with the occasional quiet song here and there. Billy has not only veered out of his lane, he has veered into a lane with oncoming traffic, and Autumn was the final car wreck. So this whole experience kind of sucked, but I'm glad I did it though, because I remember first finding out about the rock version of The End is the Beginning is the End off the Batman and Robin soundtrack, which I had never purchased, so how would I have known about it? And they didn't really play the song in the movie towards like the end, I think, for the credits or some shit like that. But it's like I discovered this hidden gem from a time when the Smashing Pumpkins were still putting out great music. So I didn't want to make that mistake again and possibly pass up a great Billy Corgan solo song. But there aren't any. And before anyone says it, yes, I am well aware that even in the Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan wrote everything. So those albums are basically like solo albums too. But to that, I say no, not necessarily. See, there once was a time when Billy had enough respect for his band and the fans that he would write music that could live in the Smashing Pumpkins world. And though, yes, that world was ever expanding because every album sounded different than the previous, they were exciting evolutions that took the listener to a new place. A good new place. For instance, 90s Billy Corgan would have never, ever written a song like Hooray. But 2020's Billy? Fuck it. I like it, and fuck the fans too, because I know they'll hate it and I don't care. That's the Billy we have now. So I can't really recommend any of these albums. I guess The Future Embrace would be my favorite out of the 4, just because the instrumentation felt like something that could slide in between Adore and Machina, but not be nearly as good melodically. Oh, by the way, I should mention, Billy Corgan's done a bunch of different... Before anyone tells me and beats me over the head with this detail, I'm aware that Billy Corgan has done a bunch of different stuff. I know I know the Spun soundtrack is kind of like a hidden gem for the fans. Good luck finding a physical version of the Spun soundtrack. Good luck finding a halfway decent version of the Spun soundtrack on YouTube. They do have a version. I can put a link to it somewhere if you want to check it out. He does a really cool cover of Love is a Battlefield on that soundtrack that's worth listening to. And he's been all over the place. He recently collaborated with this band called Code Orange. And I'm forgetting the name of the song, but his collaboration on the song was such garbage. Like Code Orange is they're like a hard rock band, but they have kind of like a new sound. And, you know, the singer is doing this like kind of halfway between singing and screaming kind of vocal. So a world that has no what, I think that it might finally... And, you know, I was expecting Billy to come in there and just shred it, you know, because, like, back in the day, he had some ripping rock vocals, so I wanted to hear some of that energy, but nope. Billy comes in during the bridge and sings the quiet part, and it sounds like ass. At your wings, you'll go far. So that was disappointing, but I mainly in this video wanted to focus on his officially released solo stuff. And oh my god, I almost forgot to mention, he did a noise album. Yes, he did an experimental noise album. It's called Agia, Vajagia, I don't know. It was like a limited 250 pressing thing, and he sold them mainly online, but he had a couple that he sold as Madame Suzu's tea shop or whatever in Chicago, and it is just... someone who commented on the video said it the best. He said, this music would be appropriate if you were waiting in line for Space Mountain at Disney. Like, it's just random beeps, boops, scraping... weird sounds. Like, it was awful. And that's technically a Billy Corgan solo album as well. And it wasn't even on eBay, like the record. So I imagine they go for a pretty penny now. But yeah, that's also on YouTube. Although it's literally just an hour and like 16 minutes of noise. That's all it is. But yeah. Anyway, he's a very interesting guy. I think he's a hero of mine. I would never want to meet. Will always love his classic music, but I just don't think he's got it in him anymore. I think he's either tired of that kind of music to where like he could write another one. I mean, he showed us out with Beguiled. I was so excited for Autumn when I heard Beguiled. I'm like, this is a great riff. This is the melody was a little weak, but it was still, the guitar work on it was so good that I still fucked with it. And that was basically him being like, hey, I know all you dumbass Smashing Pumpkins fans like this sound that I'm doing right here, so I'm gonna feed the guppies. I'm gonna throw it out there, but just know none of the rest of the record's gonna sound anything like this, and it's just some bullshit crap that I want to do because I've just lost any kind of love for rock music. I mean, think about if like Metallica did something like that, like they just have too much respect for their fan base to do that. I mean, they even tried doing like Load and Reload or whatever in the 90s, and they were still like heavy songs, and the fans bitched so hard that Metallica had to like change their direction. And then they did Saint Anger, and fans got even more pissed off, and so they finally did Death Magnetic, and the fans were like, okay, cool, now you can live, so it's like at least Metallica listens to their fans. Anyway, this has gone on too long. Have a good rest of your night.